Hello Vector Dots, this is Maciej Lenartowicz bringing you yet another tutorial, and today I'm going to show you how to create this iOS stylized icon. Before we jump into design, I'm going to show you a couple of options, a couple of preferences I'm using when designing in Illustrator. So I've got an example file right here, and this file contains a couple of objects. There are a couple of circles and two rectangles. And you can see that when I try to select this rectangle, nothing happens. I'm clicking the fill and I can't select it. The only way I could select it right now is by clicking the path. When I click the path itself, the rectangle gets selected. And that's a preference that lives under the selection and anchor display, just right here, object selection by path only. When I disable it, you can see that whenever I click a fill or a stroke, my object gets selected. I'm going to reverse to my settings, and there are a couple of advantages of that. For example, there's an object back here, and if I were to select it, and if there were a gazillion of objects in here, it would be extremely painful to start locking these objects, start digging through my layers palette, searching for this object. But this way, when I can select my path, my object, only by clicking its path, it's a lot easier. I'll just start hovering over my objects, and whenever I hover over a path, whoops, you can see there's this square next to my cursor indicating that there's an object underneath. So this way I can easily select it. Okay, another thing is that whenever I click this circle, you can see that there's no bounding box. Well, I don't like working with bounding box, they just distract me. I just don't like them. But whenever I need them, it's very easy to get back to your bounding box. Just press Ctrl Shift B. And this instantly pops your bounding box, so we can modify your object like that. When it comes to scaling and rotating, most times I will use my rotate tool and my scale tool, and they are very handy because I can set a transformation point and I can start rotating them around my origin. So these are a couple of settings I recommend for this tutorial. Let's get into designing. Okay, so let's get started. I've gone ahead and created a new document, and this is going to be 700 pixels by 700 pixels RGB document, and the raster effects are going to be set at 150 ppi. So once this is done, I've looked for an iOS icon template, and I believe those should be about 512 pixels times 512 pixels with 90 pixels of rounded corner. So the radius of this should be about 90 pixels. Although you can do that manually, I suggest you just go Google and look for a template. Once I did that, I've created a couple of guides, and I'm turning them on using Control semicolon shortcut, just to give myself some boundaries where I should work. And once you have that, let's get started. Okay, I'd like to kick things off by creating the bottom piece of my bread. So I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to copy my icon shape to this new layer. I'm going to hide the guides layer and rename this layer to bottom. Okay, I'm going to go and get my direct selection tool, and I'm going to marquee over those 4 top points. I'm going to drag them down to about this location. I'm going to release. Next, I'm going to create a copy of this shape and fill with a slightly different shade of gray. Okay, I'm going to reverse to my direct selection tool and marquee over the 4 bottom points of the top shape. And I'm going to drag them up just like so. Okay, once I've got that, I'm going to align those 2 shapes together. Okay, now it's time for some color. I'm going to fill the bottom with a nice gradient, and that's a gradient ranging from a beige color to a very light brownish color. And that's a radial gradient, so I'm gonna grab my gradient tool and reposition it a bit. So I'm gonna resize it, so scale it up, okay, like this, and I'm gonna position it about here. Alright, I'm gonna use yet another gradient for my top of this bottom piece of bread, and this is another very light gradient. So I'm gonna grab my gradient tool and once again reposition it. Okay, we like the light portion of the gradient to be in front and the dark in the back. So it's gonna be like this. Now it looks okay, but I like to give it a little bit of depth. So I'm gonna select the bottom shape, go to Effect, Stylize, Inner Glow. Okay, here I'd like to choose a little bit darker brownish color. I'm gonna give it an opacity of about 70% and a blur of about 20 pixels. I'm gonna check preview to see if I like it. And this looks about okay, so I'm gonna click OK. And I'm gonna do the same with this shape, so I'm gonna click it, go to Effect, Inner Glow, but I'd like to increase the blur here to about 30 pixels and reduce the opacity to about 50%. I'm gonna click Preview, and that looks about okay. So I'm gonna click OK, and the bottom piece of my bread is done. Okay, let's continue with creating the top portion of our bread. So I'm gonna lock the bottom layer and bring back to view my guys layer. I'm gonna select my icon shape, create a new layer, and drag the shape to this new layer. Okay, I'm gonna drag the layer to the top of the stack and rename it to top. Okay, I'm gonna hide my guys layer again, and using my direct selection tool, I'm gonna select those 4 bottom points and drag them up just at the position of my top piece of bread, just the way I like them. Okay, I like to create another gradient here, but I want it to be a little bit more complicated, so we're gonna use gradient meshes here. So I'm gonna go to Object and choose Create Gradient Mesh. And the settings I have right now are about okay. 3 rows, 4 columns. Click OK. Okay, we're gonna colorize that using those swatches I've prepared here. And before starting to record this tutorial, I've actually Googled out a couple of photo references. So I just looked for foodstuffs, and I've created a couple of color groups. And the way I did it was very simple. I just pasted a copy of a photo in Illustrator, grabbed my eyedropper tool, and using Shift and click, I started picking different colors, and I saved them in those color palettes. So you can actually find bread here, tomato, lettuce, cheese, and ham, all those different colors. Okay, so we're gonna colorize this top shape using our bread palette. I'm gonna click it, and using my lasso tool, that's a very handy tool, you can get to it just by pressing Q, I'm gonna marquee, I'm gonna lasso around all those anchor points, and I'm gonna choose my lighter color here. Next, I'm gonna marquee about around those points, and I'm gonna choose the darker one. I like the light to be coming from the top, but slightly from the left. So I like to keep this portion lighter and this portion darker. Okay, another very handy trick just to colorize, just to get a smooth transition between 2 colors, is to select a couple of these here. I'm gonna choose my eyedropper tool, and I'm gonna shift on the transition of these 2 points, and this gives us a very smooth transition. So let's get these points a little bit lighter. I'm gonna switch to my HSB sliders. I'm gonna bump up their lightness and decrease their saturation. And let's colorize this one. Let's make it a little bit darker, that's too light. Something like about this. And those colors, I'd like them to be a little bit darker. So like so. Okay, I'm gonna take a look if I like the appearance of my bread. If I liked it, I'm gonna leave it, and I believe that's fine. Let's add some inner shadow to that, but since this is a meshed object, well, we can't actually do much with it, so I'm gonna have to copy my icon shape once again. I'm just selecting it here in the layers palette. Once again, I'm just gonna alt drag it to the top of the stack. And once again, I'm gonna choose my direct selection tool and select these 4 points and drag them. I'm gonna try to align them perfectly with the ones I created recently. Okay, that looks fine, so I'm gonna hide this layer. Alright, now I'm gonna give it a white fill. The next thing is to go to Effect and apply an inner glow. And this time I like it to be definitely bigger, so I'm gonna go to my appearance panel and click this inner glow link. I'm gonna bump up the blur to about 50 pixels, and this looks about okay. So I'm gonna click OK, and there it's done. Okay, of course we can't leave this white part in here the way it is right now, so a very handy way to do that is just to go to transparency and change the blending mode to multiply. This will knock out the dark, this will actually knock out the light colors and leave the dark ones in place. So this shading is far more realistic, it looks a lot better. There is one more tweak I'd like to add to the shading, and that's a little bit of inconsistency happening about on this top edge. Well, the light is coming from this side, so I don't like this area where it's definitely too dark. So I'd like to lighten this a little bit, and since I can't actually do much with this shape, with this shadow, I'm just gonna have to go around it and tweak it in a little bit different way. So I'm gonna just scale this shape up and mask sections of it. So I'm gonna Alt copy, I'm gonna Alt drag a copy of this shape, and I'm gonna press D to reduce it to its basic appearance. And you can see in the appearance panel everything is stripped out besides, well, of course, the default stroke and the default white fill. So I'm gonna dump the stroke, and this fill I'm just gonna change it to another color. Let's say, of course, I'm gonna switch to my fill color. I'm gonna give it, well, something like this. Okay, that should work. Okay, now this shape, I wanna move it. I'm going to scale it a little bit up. So I'm gonna move this out of the way totally. I'm gonna select this shape and click, 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 and click on 4 of these top anchor points. I'm gonna move them up a little bit, just like this. Maybe I'm gonna nudge them using my keyboard a bit down. Next thing is to make sure that this shape, this path, is on the top of the stack. I'm gonna move it back in the middle of my document. I'm gonna click it and shift click this shading layer. I'm gonna press Ctrl 7. This creates a clipping mask. I've got a group here with a clipping mask inside it. And that's okay. My lighting is now definitely better, it's more consistent. The two halves of my bread are ready. Now I'd like to add something in between them. So I'm gonna click my bottom layer and create a new one just above it. I'm gonna rename it to lettuce, and using my pen tool and with a dark color, I'm gonna start drawing a couple of shapes. And the look I'm going for here are just some random curly wavy lines. Something that will mimic an appearance of a lettuce leaf. So once I'm happy with the result, I'm gonna close my path, revolve it, maybe scale it up, scale it down. Once I'm happy with the result, I'm gonna go to Object and create Gradient Mesh. Now, depending on the shape you've created, you may use couple of different number of rows or columns here, but I'm good with 2 rows and 3 columns. So I'm gonna click OK. I'm gonna change the color of my leaf to green, to dark green. And now I'm going to colorize this object using the same method as I used for 2 pieces of bread. So I'm gonna grab my lasso tool. I'm gonna start lassoing around those objects, those anchor points. I'm gonna start changing their color. And you can see all those meshy lines give me a very interesting effect when they are colorized. So I'm gonna change those here and change those there. A couple of contrasting colors. Of course, I'm gonna darken these 4 up here. And you can continue working on those shapes until you're happy with them. Okay, so that's gonna be my first leaf. I'm gonna drag out a copy. And I'm going to reposition a couple of those points just to give them a slightly different appearance. So this one here and that one there. Oops, that didn't work. I'm gonna grab both of them. And maybe I'll change these colors. Okay, and just for the sake of variance, I'm gonna create one more leaf and tweak its color a little bit more. Okay, the last thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna transform this guy, I'm gonna reflect it, and my leaves are good to go. Okay, these shapes are definitely too big to work as a lattice for us, so I'm gonna select all of them. I'm using my scale tool. I'm gonna scale them down, just like so. Okay, and once this is done, I'm gonna start positioning them just underneath my bread. So I'm gonna grab them and put them around here. And you can zoom in to see what you're doing. And now it's just a matter of positioning. So move them where you like them, maybe rotate them a little bit, scale them up or scale them down. Just keep them where you like them and change their position. So you can use a bunch of transformation like rotating, scaling, aligning them in a different way. Okay, I'm gonna try to cover as much empty space as possible in here. Okay, one more thing you can always do is to Alt click this layer, which will select all those objects up here, and press a key combination of Ctrl Shift Alt D, which will open the Transform Each dialog box, and you can introduce some randomness to the design just typing some random numbers. For example, I'm gonna scale all of them 90% down and rotate each of them about 15%. And make sure you check random here since you want to have a random transformation. And that looks about okay. So a couple of more tweaks I'm gonna introduce here. See, I've got some empty space up there, so I'm gonna copy this one, and they are starting to look about okay. So one more up here, but I'm gonna reflect this one. This looks about okay. So once you're happy with the appearance of this layer, alt-click it, go to Effect, Stylize, and drop Shadow. And I'm going to actually cancel out of this window since due to all those selections I can't actually see what I'm doing. So I'm going to press Ctrl H to hide my selection edges. I'm going to go to Effect, Stylize, and drop Shadow once again. And now when I can see better, I can start tweaking my shadow. So let's say I don't want any X offset, so this is horizontal offset, moving them to the right or to the left, and I don't want any Y offset. So I'm gonna type in 0 here. I'm just gonna play with the blur settings. Let's say blur of 3 pixels, or blur 4 pixels works for me. Well, keep experimenting until you find something you like. I'm gonna go with 5 pixels here. And maybe I'll reduce the opacity to 50%. And this looks about okay. So I'm gonna click OK. Okay, so we have a very nice green carpet of lettuce. Now let's add some contrasting colors. I'm gonna click the bottom layer and create a new one. I'm going to change its name and color. With this layer selected, I'm gonna go to File, Place, and choose a photo reference of a tomato slice. Now this is essentially one big circle, so I'm going to grab my ellipse tool and I'll draw a circle. Okay, I'm going to get rid of the stroke and fill the circle with a dark shade of red. Now I'm going to grab my scale tool and, keeping the circle selected, I'm going to start making copies. And the first one will be filled with this bright pink color. Another copy I like to fill with this another shade of red. Okay. Now I like to stylize them a little bit, so I'm gonna go to Effect, Distort and Transform, and Zigzag. And here I like to mess with the options. First of all, the size will be set to 1 pixel. I like to have 12 ridges per segment and change their appearance to smooth. And this looks definitely better. Okay, so that's the basis of my tomato. Another thing to add here is this very bright core of the tomato. So I'm going to grab my pen tool and using white color, I'm going to start sketching out this core shape. And I'm not trying to be very precise here. A very rough outline will work great. Okay, I'm up to a point where I actually can't see what I'm doing, so I'm gonna press Shift X to swap my fill color with my stroke color, and I'll keep drawing this outline. Okay, once I'm near the end, I'm gonna close the path and change the stroke with the fill again. Okay, I'm gonna position my core shape inside of my slice. I'm gonna scale it up a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to fill it with a gradient. And it's going to be a gradient ranging from white to this dark red color. Going to position my shape in the middle of the slice and make sure that the gradient is inside. Okay, now I'd like to change the blending mode to screen and reduce this swatch and the gradient to 0% opacity. And this looks great. Okay, I'm gonna scale it up a little bit more, and using my rotate tool, I'm going to rotate it and press Alt to create a copy. Okay, and if you zoom out, this actually starts to resemble a tomato. Alright, so there's one more element I'd like to add, and those are the seeds of our tomato. So I'm going to create a circle filled with some solid color, and using my direct selection tool, I'm going to select this top anchor point and drag it out towards the top. And that's basically a seed shape. I'd like to fill with another gradient, so I'm going to choose any gradient, and for this middle color I like to use this bright pink, and for my shadow color I like to use this red. Okay, I'm going to position my seed over my tomato and see what blending mode will actually work with this color. So I'm going to go to my transparency palette, press Ctrl H to hide my selection edges. I'm going to start experimenting with these blending modes. And you could go with overlay, hard light. I believe that color dodge will work best here. So once this is done, I'm going to adjust the size of my seed. I'm going to rotate around a couple of copies. Of course, I'm pressing Alt and using my rotate tool. You can also press Ctrl D once you're happy with the transformation to repeat it. I'm going to do the same for the other side of the tomato. I'm just pressing Ctrl D here. Now, I'm going to select all these shapes, and the easiest way to do that is to select one of them and find this button. And what it does is selects all the objects as long as they have the same color, as long as they have the same blending mode, and fill color, stroke color, a couple of other attributes. Once I have them selected, I'm gonna press my scale shortcut, this is S. I'm going to scale them down just like so. Okay, so those are 2 rows. It's actually semicircles of my seeds. I'm going to select them once again. I'll go to Object, Transform, Transform Each dialog box. I'm going to input a couple of settings. Well, 80% for horizontal and vertical scale will work, about 5 pixels of horizontal and vertical movement, and about 15% of angle rotation. And this should work okay. So we can also fiddle with these settings. Let's say I'll adjust the horizontal and vertical movement, and that randomizes their position a little bit better. And also make sure that the random checkbox is turned on, otherwise you'll get a very uniform transformation. So once I'm happy with the result, I'm going to press OK, and maybe I'll manually reposition a couple of those seeds just to give them more randomized appearance. Okay, once you're happy with the result, and you can notice that I'm leaving the top portion of my slice empty. That's because we will tuck it under the carpet of lettuce later. Okay, once I'm happy with that, I'm going to select all these shapes and press Ctrl G. And this basically creates a tomato slice. Okay, with this tomato ready, I'm going to zoom out and I'll drag a copy. It's always better to leave a copy of the tomato for later use. And now I'm going to position it about here under my lettuce, and I will scale it down. And I'll keep experimenting with these until I find the position and scale which works best for them. Of course, the perspective doesn't match here, so I'm going to select it once again, hide my selection edges. Of course, I'm doing that using Ctrl H, keyboard shortcut. I'm going to use my scale tool. I'm going to nudge it like so until the perspective is a little bit more workable. And this about looks right. Last thing to do, I'm going to scale it up just a little bit more so get a big nice slice of tomato. Let's keep working on our tomato slice. I'm going to select it and scale it down just a little bit more. Now I'm going to double click it, and this isolates my whole group. So I have my whole group here. I can safely manipulate it without the danger of moving or changing any other object on my page. So I'm going to click this most bottom ellipse, and I'm going to drag a copy down here. Now I'm going to double click it, and using my direct selection tool, I'll get rid of this top point. I'll just marquee around it and delete it. Okay. Now I need to extend these two anchor points to match the side anchor points of my first ellipse. So I'm going to click this link to go back to my group, and with my pen tool I'm going to click on one anchor point. I'm going to look for another one, and it's about here. So I'm going to click again. I'm going to look for the opposite anchor point, and it's around here, and I'm going to close my path. So here it is. I have the bottom of my, I have actually the side of my tomato slice. I'm going to give it a slightly different color. Actually, I'm going for a gradient here. So I'm going to fill it with a gradient, and I'll use a couple of different colors. Something like this should work. So we're going to go from lighter color to a darker one. Okay, let's double click anywhere beside our object, and you can see that I could do a couple of tweaks here. So let's go back to my group. Let's select this shape and press Ctrl X. That will cut our shape. Now let's select everything here and press Ctrl B to paste our shape in the back. And this fixes our problem. Okay, there's one more thing we could do here, and that's shading. A very handy technique to do that is, well, of course I could always draw a new gradient here, but there's a very neat trick you can use to apply some shading to the gradient. I'm going to duplicate this fill, and I'm just doing that by clicking on my fill icon and dragging it over this new icon. Okay, this gives me a new fill, and now I'll change the gradient here. This swatch will be white, and this swatch will be black. I'm going to position my black about here, and my white about here. Now I'll drag two copies of these, and I will change their color to a shade of gray. Now apparently this doesn't help much, so there's one more tweak. I'm just going to click this arrow and click the opacity link, and I will change the blending mode to overlay, and this gives me a better lightning here, a better shading of my tomato slice. Okay, the tomato slice is almost ready. The last thing to do here is to select these two shapes, press Ctrl G to group them together. Now I'm going to create a new layer and start working on my cheese slice. So I'm going to get my pen tool, and I'll start drawing half of my cheese slice. Okay, I can always use my direct selection tool to adjust these points. And I like the appearance of it. I'm going to drag out a copy and reflect it. I'm going to align these two shapes together, and using my Pathfinder palette, I'm going to merge them together. I'm also going to give them more cheesy color. Okay, so this is going to be the top of our cheese slice. We're going to drag out a copy down here to create the bottom of it, or the side of it, but before that I like to cut a hole in here just to indicate that it's some kind of Swiss or a cheddar cheese. So I'm going to grab my ellipse tool, I'm going to draw a small ellipse, I'm going to rotate it a little bit and position it on top of my slice. Now I'm just going to marquee over 2, and once again using my Pathfinder palette, I'm going to choose minus front, and this looks perfect. Okay, so this is going to be my slice of cheese. I just need to add some edge, so I'm going to grab it and Alt drag up, and this creates a copy. I'm going to give it a lighter color, and I'm going to extend these two anchor points up so that they create a nice edge. And the simplest way to do that is to marquee over this point and delete it. Now, using my pen tool, I can click on these points and fill in the rest of my shape. Okay, this slice of cheese needs a little bit more tweaking, so I'm going to select my direct selection tool and marquee over these 2 points in the corners. Now I'm going to drag them up just a little bit. This looks better. Okay, now I could actually define these edges a little bit more, so I'm going to select both these shapes, go to Effect, Stylize, oops, once again Effect, Stylize, Inner Glow, and I'm going to find a nice yellow color here, something brighter maybe. I'll choose the multiply blending mode, and I'll start playing with the settings. First of all, I'm going to select preview so that I know what I'm doing, and maybe I'll reduce the opacity to about 50% and change the blur to about 3 pixels. Let's check this out. Okay, let's bump up this to about 75% and reverse the blur to 5 pixels. And this gives us some more definition. Okay, so this slice of cheese is ready. Let's just group it together and position it somewhere about here. Of course, I'm going to scale it up. Just like so. Well, for the time being we can see that we could use some more room, but we're going to adjust it later. Okay, so the last thing I'd like to add to my delicious sandwich is a slice of ham. So let's create some ham. I'm going to create a new layer. And on this layer I like to create a very flat ellipse. So I'm going to change its color. And about here in the middle I'll draw out a very flat ellipse. Right, I don't need this point, so I'm going to delete it. And with this arc selected, I'm going to go to Effect, Distort and Transform, Zigzag. And now once again I'll start fiddling with these options. First of all, I'm going to change my points to smooth, and I'm going to bump up the size to about 20 pixels. Well, this is a good place to start. I'm not going for I don't know, a bologna sandwich here. I like to have a nice, curly, waving slice of pork or a turkey ham. So I'm going to go to Object, Expand Appearance. And this lets me modify each and every single anchor point. So I'm going to grab my Direct Selection tool, and I'll start dragging these points around. Once again, I'm trying to make them look less uniform. So those should be those curly, wavy shapes of a ham. And you can always get some image reference, some photos, just to help you with the design. Okay, so I'll keep fiddling with these, and when I'm happy, I'm just going to click it, and using my pen tool, I'm going to add the back of the slice. This shape in the back doesn't have to be very precise since it's going to be concealed under the other elements, but it should work as a nice filler. Okay, once this is done, I'm going to change the color, and now I'm going to use another gradient mesh to colorize this object. Now, depending on the number of waves you have here, you're going to use different number of columns. But in general, I suggest you start with just one row. and I'll keep increasing the number of columns. I'll try to align them with these top ridges. So 7 works. This should be about okay. So about 10 columns works for me. I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to start colorizing my ham. Once again, I think that the easier way to do this is using the lasso tool. So I'm going to click it, and I'm going to pick a couple of colors here. So for these points, these will be on the top, so these will be my highlights. I'll marquee around all of them and choose a very bright color. Apparently I have to change these two. Oops, not this one. I'll start over again. And I can always pick this color. And now these points on the bottom, I like to give them a slightly different color. So I'll go with this one maybe. And this looks about okay. Now these points here in the back, well, they are quite dark, but they should be less saturated definitely. So I'll give them another color. Maybe I'll desaturate them a little bit. Okay, so you can start playing with those shapes, but once you decide you're happy with them, you can settle with. So I'm going to change this color to another one, maybe something darker here on the sides. Okay, once I've got that, I'm going to Alt drag down a copy, and using Control combination, Control Shift left bracket, I'm going to send them to the back. Now I'm going to click this Recolor Artwork button, and in case you can't see it, you can always go to Edit, Edit Colors, and Recolor Artwork. And this enables me to change the lightness of this color group like so. So I'm going to decrease it quite radically, and I'll tuck it about here, just underneath. So just that I have a very nicely defined edge. Maybe I'll decrease or increase the lightness a little bit and saturate most of my colors. And this definitely looks better. Okay, this slice of ham is almost ready. I'm just going to marquee around these two shapes and press Ctrl G to group them together. Next thing is just a minor tweak, but I like to give it some more perspective, so I'm going to go to my lasso tool again. I'm going to lasso around all these points. Once this is done, I'm going to press S to get my scale tool, and I'll scale them slightly like so. Maybe I'll scale the whole shape just like this, and I'll try tucking it underneath my other objects just to see if they work. And I believe this whole sandwich is starting to look quite okay. I can always isolate this shape, and using my lasso tool, select a couple of points, move them around just to adjust the shape to my liking. Okay, and this is starting to look pretty okay. Okay, so all the basic ingredients of our ham sandwich are ready. Now let's add a couple of tweaks to it just to make it look right. And first of all, I'd like to address this issue here. We don't actually have enough space. We don't actually have enough room for all those ingredients down here. There's definitely too much bread. So I'm going to start with the bottom layer. I'm going to lock every layer and unlock the bottom layer. Now I'm going to grab my direct selection tool, and I'll look for those 4 anchor points defining the top shape. And I will drag them, I will nudge them down just like so, and this definitely helps to get some more stuff inside. Now I'm going to lock this layer back. On the top layer, I'll just marquee around these points, and I will move them slightly up. Well, this will affect our blend slightly, our mesh gradient, but won't have a big impact on the whole design. Actually, you can't see much here. You can't see much difference in here. Now, okay, let's unlock all these layers, and let's alt-click on the lattice layer. I'll hide my selection edges, and using my keyboard shortcut Shift up arrow, I'm going to nudge those a little bit up. Okay, now it's time for the tomato. I'm going to move it up like this, and the same thing will happen with the cheese layer. Okay, so these are in place. I'm just going to move the cheese layer down like so, so that it's a little bit more visible, and I will use this leaf to cover the edge. Okay, now we have some more room, so we can move the ham down, and I'm going to duplicate the tomato layer. I'm gonna call it tomato 2, and I'll drag it down just over the ham layer. I'll select it and move it about here, at the same time resizing my shape. And I'll position it right about here under my cheese. I'll scale it down so that we have a little bit smaller version of our tomato. Okay, let's move it about here, and this looks good. Now, this area looks definitely empty, so I'm going to grab a couple of leaves and move them here. So let's create a new layer, and this one will be just under the cheese layer. So tomato 2, and click a new layer. I'm going to call it lettuce 2. Now I'm going to click the shape and alt drag it down to the lettuce 2 layer. And now I'll start moving it around here. I'll drag out a copy, change its position, rotate a little, do all of those things that make it look a little bit better. Okay, my sandwich is nearing its completion, so let's add a couple of final tweaks. First of all, I like to unify all the shadows in this sandwich. So we can see that our lettuce leaves have some shadow. Let's add the same shadow to the other objects. So I'm going to click my tomato, I'm going to shift click my cheese, I'm going to do the same with the other object. Next, I'm going to press Ctrl H to hide my selection edges. I'm going to go Effect, Stylize, and Drop Shadow. Here I'd like to have no offset, so I'm going to zero out all these values. I'm going to have blur of 5 pixels and the opacity of 75% with the blending mode multiply, and of course the shading color will be black. I'm going to preview that. It looks great, so I'm going to click OK. Now the only object here that is not casting a shadow on anything else is this top portion of bread. So I'm going to go to my top layer. I'm going to select it. Okay. Next I'm going to draw a very flat ellipse just underneath. I'm going to fill it with black. I'm going to cut it using Ctrl X. Next I'm going to select all these objects here. I'm going to press Ctrl B to paste my ellipse in the back. Now I'll go to Effect, Blur, Gaussian Blur. Now it's a matter of preference and experimentation how much you would like to blend, how much you would like to blur this shape. Let's try 10 pixels for starters. I'm going to click OK, and this gives me some transition here, but you can see that it extends here and abruptly ends about here. So I'm going to locate this shape here. I'm going to double click it. This allows me to edit it in the isolation mode. So I'm going to move these points about here, and the second one about here. I'm going to play with these handles until I get a result I like. So let's try leaving the isolation mode, and it's starting to look okay. Okay, I'm starting to click all these shapes, all these objects by accident, so it's best to lock all these layers so that I can select this one only. Okay, so now I'm going to play with those anchor points a little bit more. I'm trying to get some realistic shadow here. Well, as realistic as I can. And this is starting to look about okay. Let's take a look at it. Looks pretty much okay. The last thing to do is to select it and change its opacity. The same, 75%. This looks great. The top portion of my bread looks a little bit empty, so I'd like to add a couple of details there. I'm going to create a new layer and call it Sesame. On this layer, I'm going to create an ellipse and modify it just to get a seed-like shape. I'm going to fill it with a subtle gradient and adjust it. Okay, now I like to give this some more definition, so I'm going to go to Effect, Stylize, Inner Glow. I'm gonna go with Multiply and find a nice brown color. I'll reduce the blur to about 3 pixels and preview that. Well, opacity of about 40% should work here. Okay, I'm going to scale it down and start dragging out copies. Of course, I'm performing one duplication, and later I'm just pressing Ctrl D to duplicate my last transformation. Okay, so I have a couple of copies. I'm going to select all of them and go to Object, Transform, Transform Each. Here you can start playing with the settings. I believe that 50% horizontal and vertical scale and 20 pixels movement in every direction, along with the rotation angle of 180 degrees, will do the trick for me. So I'm going to press OK. I'm going to duplicate some more of these shapes. I'll rotate them, position them in a couple of random locations. So just keep tweaking your shapes until you like the result. My icon is virtually ready. There is only one effect I'd like to add, and this will be a global emboss effect. So I'm going to lock the Sesame layer and create a new one. And on this layer I'd like to have a copy of those two shapes that put together will envelop all this icon. So I'm going to go to my bottom layer, unlock it, and grab this shape. Okay, next I'm going to Alt, copy it all the way to the emboss layer. Now I'm going to do the same with my top layer. So I'm going to lock this layer back, unlock my top layer, and locate this shape. Well, actually, the clipping path will work better. So I'm going to copy that to my emboss layer. Now, with those two shapes selected, I'm going to marquee around them and choose Unite. Just to see better, we can fill it with a white color. Okay, so this is going to be our shape. Now, using the same trick I described earlier, let's add some inner glow. So let's go to Effect, Stylize, Inner Glow. And here we're going to change the blending mode to Multiply, and we're going to add some nice brown color that will fit nicely with the rest of the design. So let's bump up the blur to about 30 pixels, and let's start playing with these values. So I'm going to click Preview and check what it looks like. So I'm going to click OK and change the blending mode of this object to multiply. Instantly we can see that there's some nice shading on the edges. Okay, and now it's a matter of your personal preference. I'm just going to reduce the opacity of this layer to about 50% and change the range of my inner glow to about 40 pixels. And this setting works best for me. Okay, you can always turn it off or on, depending on what you like most. And I believe this is where I'm going to settle with the appearance of my icon. I like the design, I like the appearance, I like the effect. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and stay tuned for more. Bye bye.